Testing, testing, one, two, three, four.
I got it.
It's in there as well, but Ms. Titus has got a brief intro for the from Las Vegas.
Subcommittee on Highways and Transit will come to order. Before we begin, I want to take just a quick opportunity to wish my colleague, Ranking Member Holmes Norton, a happy birthday. And I'm not going to sing, and I'm not even going to ask how old you are, but I'm just going to say happy birthday and wish you many happy returns on the day. I ask unanimous consent that the chairman be authorized to declare recess at any time during today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. Also ask unanimous consent that members not on the subcommittee be permitted to sit with the subcommittee at today's hearing and ask questions. Without objection, so ordered. As a reminder, if members wish to insert a document into the record, please email it to documentsti@mail.house.gov. I now recognize myself for the purposes of an opening statement. I want to thank our witnesses for being here today and offering their perspectives on lessons learned in transit over the past several years. Transit agencies provide transportation services in nearly every community across the country, big, small, rural, and urban. In my home state of Arkansas, we have the Rock Region Metro in Little Rock that operates buses and a 3-mile streetcar, the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville that maintains the local system, and the Jonesboro Economical Transportation jet that allows my constituents to utilize bus service to get to and from work, school, healthcare appointments, and all sorts of other activities. According to the Federal Transit Administration, our national system of transit providers includes nearly 3,000 agencies that operate around the country. Like all industries, COVID had a huge impact on transit services, accelerating what were already declining ridership rates and causing an historic decline in overall ridership and fare revenue collections. Due to this, the FTA received significant funding in the various COVID relief bills. Specifically, FTA was provided nearly $70 billion to distribute to transit agencies nationwide to cover short-term budget gaps, primarily operating expenses such as labor costs. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or IJA, was subsequently signed into law in November 2021 and provided a further $108.2 billion for public transportation, the largest amount of funding for those programs in American history. For those keeping count, that's almost $180 billion in federal money that's been allocated since 2020 for transit programs. IJA alone provided a 77% increase over FTA funding amounts from prior authorization. All of this money will be distributed to local transit agencies in just over a 6-year window of time. One goal for today's hearing will be to gain a better understanding of how that massive amount of funding has been used. I also hope that our witnesses will provide us with the good, the bad, and the ugly in terms of changes to transit operations implemented in response to the impacts of COVID-19. I referenced the $70 billion that FTA received in pandemic relief funding, and it's important to point out that not all transit systems or agencies are created equal for the purposes of funding allotment. Transit broadly includes all sorts of transportation services ranging from large bus systems and subways to ferries and paratransit. The nation's largest and longest operating systems are often referred to as legacy systems. Major American cities which are home to these legacy systems include Boston, Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, San Francisco, and right here in Washington. Collectively, these 6 metropolitan regions receive more than half, 53.6%, of all urban FTA-apportioned funding from COVID relief packages. These cities also happen to be where reports of crime, assaults, and attacks on transit riders and workers have grown at an alarming rate. In New York City, for example, the circumstances became so dangerous to the public that earlier this year the governor was forced to deploy National Guard troops and state police officers to help patrol the subway system. Last month, I joined many of my Republican colleagues in authoring a letter to FTA seeking more information about its safety and security training programs and how it plans to address the rising crime in and around transit systems. The overwhelming sense of fear and danger for many transit users escalates the challenge of increasing ridership to pre-pandemic numbers. It's important that this subcommittee gain insight into how newly established ridership patterns are being considered by the transit industry. According to the National Transit Database, or NTD, Federal Repository for Transit Agency Performance Data, monthly ridership on transit reached an all-time high nearly a decade ago in October of 2014 and has been on a slow but steady trend downward since that time. While the pandemic did cause an unprecedented loss of daily riders on transit systems, it only accelerated an ongoing trend. The latest data shows that national transit use has returned to about 79% of pre-pandemic levels. 79% is better than where those ridership numbers were a year ago, but it still means that about 1 out of every 5 revenue-generating riders from before the pandemic has not returned to regular use of service. So how are transit agencies responding to this new normal to deliver to their customers? Some have expanded their use of private contracted services. Most have had to reorient services, routes, and other operations. And many, especially in large metro areas, have reduced or eliminated fares to try and draw riders back. I hope that our witnesses will address those various strategies, including the financial math behind them, and provide us with facts on the ground about how those adaptations that have proven successful can be replicated. Again, I want to thank all our witnesses for being here and look forward to your testimony. I now recognize Ranking Member Norton for an opening statement for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I would like to thank Subcommittee Chair Rick Crawford for holding this hearing on public transportation. During COVID-19, that pandemic, Americans were reminded about how important public transit is. Millions of essential workers rely on public transit to get to their jobs. During the worst days of the pandemic, bus drivers, train operators, station managers, and maintenance personnel risked their safety to make sure that other essential workers could get to their jobs. In doing so, hundreds of public transit workers lost their lives to COVID-19. We owe them a debt of gratitude, along with our continued commitment to give public transit employees safe workplaces and fair compensation. I would like to thank Greg Regan, the president of the Transit Trades Department, for being here today on behalf of those workers. The COVID relief funds, including the more than $30 million provided by this subcommittee as part of the American Rescue Plan, were part of our commitment to public transit workers and riders alike. Congress built on that commitment with the passage of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which provided a record $108 billion in funding for public transportation. Together, these investments, along with support from state and local governments, have created a foundation from which transit agencies can rebuild and recover. Changes in ridership, travel patterns, and commuting mean that transit agencies must rethink their service to ensure that they can meet the needs of their communities. Here in the nation's capital that I represent, the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority has made several recent changes that have supported its recovery. Last year, it launched Metro Lift, a program to provide reduced transit fares to low-income residents. It also increased service, including on nights and weekends, making public transit a more reliable and efficient option for travelers. And Metro is also working on redesigning its bus network. The changes will be based on extensive public comments with the goal of improving connectivity, equity, and access. Metro's efforts are already paying off. Earlier this month, Metro ridership surpassed pre-pandemic levels, and Metro Rail continues to show strong recovery, ridership recovery. Metro's success is critical to our region's public transit riders, but it is critical to our economy. Without public transit, our region would lose more than $9 billion, that's B with a billion, dollars worth of economic activity to traffic gridlock, delays in freight shipments, and lack of access to jobs and to the environment. And as we heard in recent testimony in this subcommittee, public transit is also critically important to riders in suburban and rural areas who depend on bus and paratransit service for access to jobs and medical appointments. Public transit is among the safest transportation modes and is 10 times safer than driving. The benefits of public transit are clear. It is equally clear that if we want the benefits that public transit brings, all levels of government must be willing to invest in it, all levels. Like many other modes of transportation, including most highways, public transit systems are not intended to turn a profit. The benefits from public transit investment include more successful businesses and stronger local economies. They include good jobs for public transit workers and connections to jobs for other workers. They include avoided traffic fatalities and fewer commutes down gridlock highways. They include cleaner air and better health outcomes. If those are the benefits we seek in our communities, we must be willing to invest in them. I look forward to working with colleagues to continue this committee's long history of supporting public transit. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, and I now recognize the full committee ranking member Larson for up to 60 seconds.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Recognized for 5 minutes.
You might be surprised, I might finish much sooner than that. But thank you, Chair Crawford and Ranking Member Norton, for holding this hearing. Today's hearing allows the committee to examine public transit operations and the unique challenges that transit agencies face emerging from the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, during the pandemic, we saw how communities across the country depend on their transit systems and how essential these services are. Transit agencies and their workers played an important role. The dedicated public service of transit workers ensured that doctors, nurses, and other essential workers were able to get to their work. That's why Congress delivered for transit agencies and their workers with nearly $70 billion in emergency funding. These dollars ensured that these essential mobility services kept operating. Today, transit agencies are rising to the challenge as they explore new ways to provide efficient, safe, and quality service while navigating the changing needs of riders and communities post-pandemic. During the pandemic, some businesses shifted to remote work, people moved to new communities or states, and many invested in buying a car or a bike as a mode of transportation. Riders continue to return to transit, but current ridership volume nationwide is about 80% of what it was in 2019. This drop in ridership has had lingering impacts on transit agency operations and budgets, which rely on fare revenue. In 2020, transit agency fare revenue nationwide dropped by nearly half, and roughly 50% of transit agencies reported having to make service modifications in response to the loss of riders and revenue. As ridership has returned, fare revenue is also rebounding, but transit agencies continue to need to cover the gap in their operational costs. Like so many parts of the transportation industry, many transit agencies have also had workforce challenges, which directly impact service levels. While there's competition with the private sector for qualified commercial drivers, agencies have had some success with enhanced recruiting and retention programs and incentives. Now, in order to address these current challenges, agencies must start by reviewing the needs of their communities, how their legacy routes and operations can improve, and what new service will grow ridership. Public opinion surveys show that people want frequent service, more accurate trip information, routes that are more convenient for riders' travel needs, cleaner vehicles and stations, and improved safety on board vehicles. Transit agencies are acting on this. Dozens of new agencies across the U.S. are seeking public input as they redesign their bus networks, build new transit projects, and adapt service levels for post-pandemic demands. In my district, Community Transit has been leading several efforts to modernize and adapt service, including developing a new plan for a bus network redesign to prepare for light rail that's coming to Snohomish County this summer. This plan enhances bus connections with the new light rail station, expands access to routes with more frequent service, and adjust service levels based on post-pandemic rider trends. This is a critical effort that ensures the agency is operating efficiently and responding to the changing needs of Northwest Washington travelers while improving the overall rider experience. Additionally, this particular agency is working on more flexible service options to address transportation gaps in the community and better connect riders to hospitals, grocery stores, job centers, and eventually the new Linwood Transit Center. So while transit systems were hard hit by the pandemic, we've seen positives in their response and recovery. Transit remains an efficient, safe, and affordable mode of transportation, and I know as a former board member of community transit in my district and a rider on Metro, even as recently as this morning when I'm here in DC working. So thank you for each of the witnesses for being here today, and I look forward to the discussion. I'll yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Now I want to welcome our witnesses once again for being here today. I want to explain the lighting system. It should be pretty self-explanatory. Green means go. Yellow means step on the gas because it's fixing to turn red. And when it turns red, you might hear a little of this, just as a reminder that means to stop. So that having been said, just want to make sure you're aware of that. Ask unanimous consent that the witness's full statement be included in the record without objection, so ordered. Also ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may have been submitted to them in writing without objection, so ordered. Also ask unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments and information submitted by members or witnesses to be included in the record of today's hearing without objection, so ordered. As your written testimony has been made part of the record, the subcommittee asks that you limit your oral remarks to 5 minutes. Before our first witness, Ms. Maynard gives testimony, I'd like to recognize Representative Titus to give a short introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yellow means step on the gas and go, but not when you're driving, only when you're sitting in this committee.
That's a little different than our traditional lighting system.
I just wanted to clarify that. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure for me to get to introduce M.J. Maynard, who's here representing the American Public Transportation Association. When you hear her qualifications, I'm sure you'll agree with me that she's the exact kind of person we need to listen to and learn from as we approach transit and how it affects our constituents, our businesses, and our communities. Ms. Maynard is a whip-smart leader of a large and vital government agency. She's a recognized expert on all things transportation around the country, and she's my good friend, so I'm glad she's here. MJ is the Chief Executive Officer of the Regional Transportation Commission of Southern Nevada, which is the only agency nationwide that operates a one-stop shop for public transportation, traffic management, roadway and construction funding, and regional and transportation planning. This allows more efficient operations, as the statistics under MJ's leadership show. The RTC serves an average of 153,000 riders every weekday while maintaining the third lowest operating cost in the country. Over 1.8 million residents in Southern Nevada, including my district, which is the heart of the valley, live near an RTC bus stop, which provides access to almost every hospital, college, and over 90% of the grocery stores in the region. MJ understands the importance of improving connectivity and accessibility so that we can continue to move Southern Nevada forward. Under her leadership, the RTC has also made sure advances in infrastructure serve our tourist economy and benefit every sub-community within the valley. That's why MJ has been recognized with numerous awards, including Nevada Business Most Respected Leaders in 2023, Las Vegas Inc.'s Women Inspiring Nevada Award in 2022, Nevada Business Magazine's Women to Watch in 2021, and the National Association of Women Business Owners in 2021 Women of Distinction Award in the Glass Ceiling category. It's an honor to have you here, and we look forward to your testimony and continuing to work together. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
And with that, Ms. Maynard, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you, Congressman Titus, for that kind introduction. We are extremely grateful for your efforts to help us deliver essential public transit services to the people of Southern Nevada, including the Maryland Parkway Bus Rapid Transit Project. Chairman Crawford, Ranking Member Norton, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify on behalf of the American Public Transportation Association, or APTA. Again, my name is MJ Maynard. I'm the CEO for the Regional Transportation Commission of Southern Nevada. RTC is the 14th busiest bus system in the United States. We provide over 150,000 daily trips, with 80% of our transit riders going to work or looking for work. Our system is a model of transit efficiency. We have the highest fare box recovery ratio, the lowest public subsidy, and the third lowest operating costs in the nation. I serve as vice chair of APTA, whose broad membership represents a $79 billion industry that directly employs more than 430,000 people and supports millions of private sector jobs across America. For every $1 invested in public transportation, it generates $5 in long-term economic returns. And the impacts are felt across the nation. More than 2,000 suppliers in 48 states and Washington, D.C., including smaller urban and rural areas where buses, rail cars, and their parts are often manufactured. Public transportation does far more than carry people from the destination to another. Our industry helps carry the economy. This morning, I want to share with the subcommittee why public transit is critical in America's future. We know that investment in public transportation helps communities of all sizes flourish, connecting workers to jobs, students to school, and people to health care. During the pandemic, we continued to serve our communities despite significant operating challenges. We thank Congress for passing COVID-19 emergency relief. With this critical funding, transit agencies were able to keep riders and employees safe and get people to essential jobs at hospitals, pharmacies, and community centers. Today, 99.8% of the COVID-19 transit funding has been obligated. The pandemic and resulting remote work trend took a toll on transit ridership, fare revenue, and state and local funding. But transit ridership continues to grow, and we've achieved, as you heard, 80% of pre-pandemic levels. In 2023, transit riders took 7.1 billion trips, and that's an average of 24 million trips each day. That represents a 16% increase, even though office occupancy remains stagnant at 50%. Public transit agencies have redesigned services and routes to meet changing travel preferences. In addition, transit agencies are harnessing new smart technologies to help better serve our customers, reduce operating costs, and enhance safety. For example, RTC has invested more than $33 million in additional safety and security measures, including installing GPS-based security response devices on our 450 fixed-route buses. We are using community project funding to implement a pedestrian detection and collision avoidance system that uses artificial intelligence. Today, traveling by public transit, as you heard, is 10 times safer for passengers than traveling by car, and we're working to make it even safer. The future of America's mobility depends on federal, state, and local partnerships. Given the enormous impact of our industry on our nation's economy, if you have a transit problem, you have an economic problem. This historic bipartisan infrastructure law clearly recognized that while transit services are delivered locally or regionally, our industry contributes nationally to jobs, economic growth, and productivity. Therefore, we urge Congress to honor the promise of the bipartisan infrastructure law and fully fund public transit and passenger rail in the fiscal year 2025 THEAD Appropriations Act. These funds will provide the resources necessary to invest in our nation's economic future, bringing systems to a state of good repair, providing rural access, and driving innovation and clean technologies. Capital investment grants will help us address the mobility demands of growing communities like the Las Vegas BRT project, which will transform a 13-mile corridor by connecting Harry Reid International Airport, UNLV, Sunrise Hospital, an area that is home to 90,000 residents, 85,000 jobs, and 9,000 daily transit riders. Again, thank you, Congresswoman Titus, for ensuring these federal funds are made available. This is just one of the 9,000 transit projects made possible by the bipartisan infrastructure law. In closing, I believe America's strength and progress have always been built on mobility and the opportunity it provides. In each of your districts, public transportation is changing lives. It provides real economic, social, and environmental benefits to your constituents and communities. Mr. Chairman, on behalf of APTA, thank you for including us in this important hearing.
Thank you. Ms. Hendricks, you're recognized for 5 minutes for your testimony.
Chairman Crawford and Ranking Member Norton, on behalf of the North American Transit Alliance, or as referred to, NATA, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you this morning. My name is Laura Hendricks, and I'm the CEO of TransDev US. TransDev operates multi-modes of public transportation in the U.S. and around the world, including bus, paratransit, rail, non-emergency medical transportation, microtransit, shuttle, and autonomous vehicles. I also serve as the board chair of the North American Transit Alliance. NATA is comprised of the 5 largest private transit contracting firms. In addition to TransDev, our members include Keolis, MV Transportation, We Drive You, and RATP Dev. Our member companies operate and maintain paratransit, fixed route, and other transportation services on behalf of public transit agencies in the U.S. and around the world. Our member companies comprise of up to 15% of U.S. public transportation workforce, encompassing more than 71,000 employees and delivering over 700 million passenger trips per year. 85% of NATA companies' workforce are represented by labor unions. The private sector has a long history of operating public transit services under contract to transit agencies. More than 2/3 of transit agencies in the U.S. contract with private sector to operate all or a portion of their transit services. We are on the forefront of innovation and are continually training our workforce to adapt to the changes in public transit offerings, whether it be operating and maintaining electric vehicles or the new hydrogen fuel cell vehicles or using innovative technology platforms. In the aftermath of the pandemic, we have watched the transit ridership slowly bounce back, although there have been shifts in ridership with more people working hybrid or remote schedules. We have witnessed transit agencies struggle with budget deficits and make hard decisions about how to best structure service to meet their ridership and communities. We also recognize that there's no one-size-fits-all approach. What works in a big city may not work in a small city or a rural area. Our companies see the opportunity to partner with transit agencies to design services that best serve its riders and communities, from micromobility to greater adaptation of electric vehicles, to new and expanded rail and bus rapid transit, to changing schedules to better understand, to adapt to a workforce that no longer adheres to a traditional workday. NATA member companies are sharing our experience to enable transit agencies to deliver transit services in a way that best serve the traveling public, are cost-effective, and provide good salaries, benefits, and job opportunities to our valued workforce. One of the ways transit agencies are responding to the change in public transit demand is by offering microtransit, overcoming the first and last mile hurdle. As referenced in more detail in my written testimony, NATA member companies continue successful partnership with transit agencies around the U.S. in innovative microtransit options. As the committee looks towards reauthorization, we anticipate transportation solutions like microtransit will continue to emerge to develop and address the changing landscape and meet a variety of riders' needs. Today, I would also like to share our association's recommendations for how transit agencies could work more cooperatively with private operators of public transportation. We believe that transit agencies and communities will benefit greatly from soliciting external input, streamlining the procurement process, and rethinking and redefining the benefits of contracting. We recommend establishing an advisory committee that would provide recommendations to the FTA on how transit agencies can adapt to changing demand and usage, explore how technology innovations can help transit agencies meet the changing demand, and suggest what workforce training needs will be needed. FTA should summarize the findings and report recommendations to Congress. We urge FTA and transit agencies to rethink procurement strategies to improve the efficiency in the process itself, as well as designing requests for proposals in such a way that improves competitiveness amongst contractors and promotes innovation. I want to also note that NATA expresses strong support for funding of public transit levels necessary to enable transit agencies to make critical investments in infrastructure and rolling stock. We believe that robust federal support for public transportation is a key to ensuring our citizens have mobility solutions. In closing, NATA members are excited to continue to partner with transit agencies and organized labor to advocate for reliable funding for public transit. We look forward to continuing to work with the subcommittee as it develops reauthorization legislation. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Hendricks. Mr. Scribner, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Crawford, Ranking Member Norton, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. My name is Mark Scribner. I'm a Senior Transportation Policy Analyst at Reason Foundation, a national 501c3 public policy research and education organization with expertise across a range of policy areas, including transportation. My testimony surveys transit productivity trends prior to the pandemic, examines the impact of the pandemic on travel behavior and transit systems, and discusses potential strategies for increasing the efficiency of transit operations. More detailed information is contained in my written testimony, but I want to highlight a few key points. The COVID-19 pandemic caused transit ridership to crater, and recovery has been slow. Nationwide transit ridership today stands at approximately 3/4 of 2019 levels. This has led to growing concerns about the long-term viability of transit in the United States. However, concerns about transit productivity are not new and long predate the pandemic. Researchers have developed a variety of measurement and analysis tools to gauge transit productivity, but to highlight two striking trends. Between 1960 and 2019, inflation-adjusted transit operating costs more than quintupled, while ridership remained flat. In the years preceding the pandemic, the Bureau of Labor Statistics began measuring transit labor productivity, which they calculate by dividing an index of passenger miles traveled by an index of hours worked. Ridership between 2013 and 2019 decreased by an average rate of 1% per year, while transit work hours increased at an average rate of 2.5% per year. Hours worked per employee remained relatively constant, meaning new hires were responsible for the additional work hours and thus most of the decline in labor productivity. When the pandemic hit, transit was especially vulnerable to changes that followed because transit systems were largely designed to serve peak hour weekday commuting travel. Prior to the pandemic, commuting accounted for approximately 1/5 of travel by all modes of transportation, but between 1/3 to 1/2 of travel by transit. Between 2017 and 2022, travel to and from work as a share of travel by transit declined from 41.5% to 28.6%. Much of this decline can be explained by the dramatic increase in working from home. In the face of this large decline in transit ridership, which is largely attributable to work travel trends, U.S. transit systems received record-setting federal subsidies. This large increase in federal funding allowed transit agencies to continue to provide service close to pre-pandemic levels. While transit ridership decreased by 27.8% between 2019 and 2023, transit service provided fell by only 9.5%. These dynamics had predictable effects on transit labor productivity. As I noted, the decline in transit labor productivity between 2013 and 2019 was primarily driven by increases in hours worked by new transit agency employees. Following the pandemic, the steep declines in transit labor productivity between 2019 and 2021 were almost entirely driven by decreased ridership. Transit's narrow role in U.S. transportation was further diminished by travel behavior changes following the pandemic. Between 2017 and 2022, total U.S. person trips made by transit fell from 2.5% to 1.4%. Further, U.S. transit ridership is highly concentrated in a small number of cities. In the first quarter of 2024, 76.4% of U.S. transit ridership took place in just 10 urbanized areas, with New York alone accounting for 45.7% of nationwide transit trips. Despite transit's niche status, it is a vital service for those who could not afford private vehicle transportation. Recent negative trends in transit productivity are especially troubling because of the disproportionate burden that inefficient transit service imposes on low-income Americans dependent upon transit. In my written testimony, I suggest that transit agencies should be given increased flexibility to engage in competitive service contracting and to investigate in the long term the potential for automation in order to realize substantial operating cost savings. Unfortunately, federal transit labor law, Section 13C, imposes a substantial barrier to realizing productivity improvements through labor-saving practices and technologies. Given that the decline in transit productivity is driven by the divergence of labor costs and ridership, removing federal barriers to transit agency self-help should be prioritized before additional federal subsidies are considered. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before the subcommittee, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Scribner. Mr. Regan, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and good morning, Chairman, Ranking Member Norton, and the rest of the subcommittee. Thank you for having me here this morning. I'm Greg Regan, President of the Transportation Trades Department, AFL-CIO. We are a federation of 37 unions that together represent the majority of public transportation workers in this country. Nobody knows the challenges and opportunities in this industry better than the frontline workers who keep it moving every single day. And it is a pleasure to bring their perspective to this hearing. Often we reduce discussions over public transportation to simple calculations of costs and revenues. In doing so, we overlook the important reality that transit is a public good that not only serves our local communities, but also provides benefits that advance national economic, environmental, and social objectives. Transit riders are not merely revenue. They are people in the communities you represent traveling to and from work, the supermarket, school, or a doctor's appointment. And transit workers are not a cost. They use their skills to serve millions of commuters every single day in one of the safest, most efficient, and most affordable modes of transportation we offer. If we want to grow this industry and the good jobs that come with it, we have to start by reversing decades of broken federal policy that heavily prioritizes spending on capital over operating costs. The erosion of federal policy that ensured support for transit operating costs, which began under President Reagan and ultimately came to a head in the late 90s when it was nearly eliminated in favor of strictly funding capital projects, was premised largely on ideological arguments at the time and not ones backed by empirical evidence. The consequence of this has been decades of flawed public policy, which encourages local governments and transit agencies to prioritize securing federal dollars with their limited local funds for capital projects over the crucial daily operations of services. John Samuelson, president of the Transport Workers Union, succinctly summed up this problem when he said, "So the government will give an agency a lot of money to buy a bus, but not a dime towards hiring an operator to drive it or a mechanic to maintain it." We see the worst effects of this during periods of economic downturn. The result is a predictable, cyclical pattern of decreased revenues that lead to fare increases and service cuts in order to balance budgets. Those, in turn, lead to greater declines in ridership. During the Great Recession, billions were allocated to transit systems, but only 2% was allowed for operational costs. When other revenue streams that supported operations waned, like local and state taxes, 84% of agencies ended up reducing service and 73% increased fares. This pattern is so well known that it has been colloquially named the transit death spiral, and it has been well documented in both media and research. Congress recognized this during the pandemic and temporarily allowed transit agencies to use federal formula funds for operations, ensuring that essential services continued. But while the pandemic forever changed how our communities function, policy has not changed with it, and we are once again working under the old funding scheme. I thank Congressman Hank Johnson for introducing the Stronger Communities Through Better Transit Act, which would address this problem by allocating federal matching funds for operational needs. Some transit critics have taken this opportunity to once again offer solutions that have nothing to do with improving service and everything to do with undermining labor protections that have ensured this industry is supported by a stable, highly skilled workforce for more than a half century. Attacks on these labor protections, which simply ensure that federal investments don't displace, destroy, or undermine existing jobs and disrupt local economies back home in your districts, it is an argument that has never stood up to scrutiny. Rather than blaming workers, we should be taking lessons from transit systems that are successfully addressing operational inefficiencies that we know deter commuters from using transit, like unreliable service, long waits, and overcrowded vehicles. Prior to the pandemic, cities like Seattle, Houston overhauled their bus routes and provide better coverage and frequency, and they were met with significant increases in ridership as a result. A similar effort is underway here in Washington, D.C., which WMATA believes will give people access to 17,000 additional jobs within 60 minutes of where they live. For labor's part, we have been actively working to address other challenges that we know have impacts on ridership, like concerns over persistent public safety issues on buses and rail lines. The workers our unions represent, who are often victims of violent attacks while on the job, have become all too familiar with this problem. After labor spent years advocating for long overdue worker and public safety needs that were ultimately included in the bipartisan infrastructure law, I am pleased to announce that FTA recently issued a final rule implementing significant portions of those provisions. The law requires joint labor management safety committees to conduct data-driven safety risk assessments and devise strategies to mitigate the risks of transit worker assaults as new components of the federally mandated safety process. This is critical because by establishing partnership with frontline workers who are the eyes and the ears of the system, they can help provide their insights on how to improve safety, not only for themselves, but for passengers as a whole. So in conclusion, instead of looking for solutions that would simply undermine service or workers, we need to be looking at policy changes that will enhance the growth of transit moving forward and provide greater opportunity and greater services for the communities that you are proud enough to represent. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. We now turn to member questions. I'll start by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Scribner, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act provided $108 billion for public transportation. That's a 77% increase over the prior FTA authorization. This funding came not long after the collection of COVID relief bills had pumped a total of nearly $70 billion in supplemental emergency funding to transit agencies. Even with those historic funding levels, many public transportation agencies now report that they will face fiscal uncertainty in the next few years. So if a once-in-a-generation funding increase didn't provide long-term financial stability for the nation's transit agencies, what will?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. As I said in my opening statement and in more detail in my written testimony, I do think some of these major operational efficiencies can only be realized by trying to reduce the excessive costs of labor. We have seen the trend lines both before the pandemic and after continue to go down and in terms of labor productivity. And I think if you look globally at some of the solutions that peer or near-peer countries have adopted, especially in contracting and then on heavy rail systems, automation, I think you can realize substantial operating cost savings there and get a lot more bang for your buck.
Thanks. Appreciate your insights. So, Ms. Hendricks, the North American Transit Alliance is comprised of the 5 largest private transit contracting firms. Many transit agencies often choose to work with contractors to maximize their limited budgets to achieve a shared goal of all of us here today, improving the transit passenger experience. And when an agency engages the services of a transit contractor, it follows guidance outlined in FTA's Best Practices Manual and Lessons Learned Manual. As I understand it, FTA has not updated this guidance document since 2016. That's 8 years ago and one pandemic ago. Clearly, the landscape in public transportation has changed in that time. Does NATA have recommendations for how or when FTA should update this Best Practices Manual?
Yes, the North American Transit Alliance, as referred to in my written testimony, would advise for an advisory committee, as I mentioned. We would also ask that the procurement process be streamlined with external input to ensure that the process is better detailed, including the metrics and the information that's required for a contractor to put a successful competitive bid together, meaning the details of the collective bargaining agreement, the scheduling, or is referred to as the run cut, the liquidated damages, and in partnership, how can we best streamline this process to open up, to be more competitive and more conducive? We would also ask that the timeline to respond be conducive to all thoroughness of a competitive bid process. So we have suggested to the FTA the streamlining process, the lengths of the contract, and ways that outside input can help be more efficient and cost-effective to service the communities.
Thank you. And Ms. Maynard, as I mentioned in my opening statement, crime on transit systems across the country is on the rise, especially in our major cities. While the vast majority of trips on transit take place without incident, the violent nature of the attacks that I mentioned continue to fuel the perception that all public transit systems are unsafe. What policies has the Regional Transportation Commission of Southern Nevada instituted to address rider and worker safety during and since the pandemic?
Chairman, thank you for that question. You know, public transit as a public space is truly the rolling microcosm of what's happening in any urban city. And if crime is increasing, if the unhoused population is increasing, if drug addiction, mental addiction, if that's increasing or it's prevalent, you're going to see it on public transit. And we understand that there is not a one-size-fits-all solution for that. Public transit agencies around the United States, including the RTC, are looking at ensuring that we are making safety a priority. So whether it's for the drivers, the passengers, and we're doing things like driver enclosure enhancements. We at the RTC have the GPS response button that if a driver needs something, they can literally press a button. It's GPS based. We know where they are on the bus or off the bus, and we can immediately respond by way of our security department. It's very important that we continue to partner with our local law enforcement, whether that's by way of an MOU or actually having them work on your system. For our customers, it's about presence, and so we have invested at the RTC in additional security officers to ensure that they are following data, where the incidents may occur, that's where they are assigned. And then again, because we are a reflection of what's happening in the urban city, we are now, many transit systems are working with the local jurisdictions with their social services to connect the folks on our system that may be unhoused, that may be veterans that seeking medical attention, mental drug addiction, and we're finding that we have the same customer base again because it is part of again what's happening in the urban core, and trying to solve for those social ills and how they spill into public transit is a complex problem. Definitely not a one-size-fits-all solution. So it's going to be again ensuring that the operators are safe by way of enclosures and technology, ensuring that passengers can see enforcement efforts by law enforcement or the security officers that are employed by transit agencies, and ensuring that we are investing our time with those social services to ensure that we, again, try to help solve for a very complex problem that's not necessarily a transit problem.
Thank you. Ms. Holmes Norton.
Mr. Regan, your testimony notes that too often the discussion around public transit focus exclusively on costs and revenues. This is a reductive approach that fails to recognize transit's role as a public service. These same discussions often fail to mention the far larger subsidies given to highway projects. What is the role of transit as a public service, and why it does not make sense to evaluate transit or other forms of transportation by how much the revenue they generate?
Thank you for the question. And, when I think of public transportation, I think the word public is so critical there. I think about the other areas where we use that word when we describe a service, whether it be public libraries, public parks, public schools, public roads, as you noted. All of that, when we say public, it means building the community. It means making sure that we are tying community together and providing resources for the citizens of that community. And public transit is an economic lifeblood of cities large and small all around this country. And we should not be looking at it in terms of dollars and cents. We should be looking at it at the value add it brings to communities all throughout our country.
Ms. Maynard, your testimony highlights how safe it is to travel by public transportation. In fact, traveling by public transportation is 10 times safer than traveling by car. Even though transit agencies are already very safe, what actions are the Regional Transportation Commission of Southern Nevada and other American Public Transportation Association members taking to further ensure a safe travel experience?
Thank you for that question. And again, as I previously mentioned, it really is a partnership that public transit agencies need to ensure that they are working closely with the communities in which they serve for those social services, that connection, law enforcement, the security and transit agencies themselves that have their own security firms. And I think it's important too that certainly in Southern Nevada, we have one of the deadliest pedestrian vehicle death rates in the United States. Public transit is safer, and it's ensuring that we are providing services that can help reduce some of the congestion. As an example, now that we are not only the entertainment capital of the world, but also now the sports capital of the world, we provide something called Game Day Express, and we are allowing folks that would normally drive into the Allegiant Stadium off of Las Vegas Boulevard. By doing that, we're keeping about 2,000 cars off the Strip and that area. Certainly, that less congestion improves safety. So it's really a multi-pronged approach in terms of ensuring that roads are safe by having folks travel in public transit, but also looking at ways to ensure that the traveling public and the operators and the employees are safe.
Another question for you, Ms. Maynard. Your testimony also addresses ongoing efforts across the United States by public transit agencies to regain riders after the pandemic. In the District of Columbia, which I represent, the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority is undergoing a bus network redesign to update its legacy bus routes and better serve the current needs of riders. Why is it important for transit agencies to conduct community outreach and modernize service levels and routes to attract and retain riders?
We are in the people business. We are people connecting people and providing places where they need to go. It's very important that we understand those travel patterns. I think your CEO, Randy Clark, has done a tremendous job here in Washington, understanding that the commute travel patterns have changed, and it's about reallocating those resources. And so if you previously, pre-pandemic, had a heavy commute pattern, less trips on the weekend, that's how your teams will schedule those transit trips. When you see those travel patterns changing, you adjust accordingly, and it's something they've done here very well in Washington, and other transit systems are doing the exact same thing as it relates to particularly the commuter rail pattern or commuter passenger travel.
Thank you very much, Ms. Maynard, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Mr. LaMalfa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Scribner, in talking about the electric vehicle and the Highway Trust Fund situation, you know, the trust fund has been backfilled by about $280 billion since 2008, bailouts during the COVID era, all sorts of issues along that line with the bailout. So with the huge push on electric vehicles, there really isn't a good mechanism yet for them to be taxed in a way that's commensurate with what combustion vehicle cars are doing. What do you see, from your viewpoint, would be the fairest way of doing that? I'm looking at, there's ideas for taxing everybody by the mile, or maybe just do that with electric vehicles, or some other method. What do you see as the best way for making the EVs be part of the solution?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. I do believe the future is shifting our revenue collection from per gallon taxation to per mile charging, where the method of propulsion of the vehicle doesn't matter. So the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act did reauthorize a state technical assistance grant program for states to conduct pilots on these kind of mileage fee approaches, and it also established a national pilot, which is yet to get off the ground. But I do think, and that's something Reason Foundation has worked on for a couple of decades, is that the long-term shift will be away from per gallon toward per mile charging. And I think that not only does that incorporate electric vehicles, and in fact, the declines we've seen in fuel tax collections per vehicle mile traveled have primarily come to date from improving fuel economy of
That's the perverse thing in that, is that everybody's been incentivized or shoved into getting better mileage vehicles. And so government then says, like, heck, we're not getting enough out of you gas tax dollars, so we got to hit you another way now. What do you think about, though, with the possibility of how intrusive keeping track of people's mileage is going to be? I mean, such as GPS or the meters as you drive past, like on toll roads. How do we do that in a way that isn't in people's business personally, on tracking where they're going and such?
Right, so that's an excellent question, and privacy is a top concern and a major focus of the research right now. The simplest way is to simply not collect location information. Hawaii, for instance, recently established what will become a mandatory mileage fee program, and what they do is they leverage their annual safety inspections and collect odometer readings, which they already were. They were collecting odometer reading information, and they are simply then applying a fee to that.
Not every state has an annual requirement. You have to go visit somebody and take time out of your day or week to do that. So some have 2-year smog checks. Newer vehicles don't have to go for their first smog check for 6 or 8 years. So now we have another trip people have to make to go report something. Is there a way we can do this on an honor system where I can just fill out a form annually if I can afford it, or quarterly if I want to pay quarterly, or an estimate? How about that?
Well, perhaps not, maybe not quite the otter system, but there are applications. You can take a picture of your odometer reading with a cell phone and then be subject to occasional random auditing. So there are ways to
A picture of my odometer or maybe my neighbor's odometer? I mean, at what point do you decide you trust people or not?
It gets these mechanisms, and there is a trade-off between privacy and auditability for any of these systems.
I'm
and that's
pretty big
something
on
we're
the
grappling
privacy
with.
side, sir. So, I think let's design a system where people aren't being followed around even more so for the government to take money from them, right? So let's shift gears to high-speed rail in California. One of my favorite things to talk about, since it's such a boondoggle and a rat hole in my home state. So what do you see as, let's just shift to, let's keep you with Mr. Scribner. Now, you've seen how that thing has been estimated $33 billion to begin with was what the voters were sold when they agreed to $9 billion worth of bond money. And it's since risen to $128 billion and counting, and it's many, many years behind. Please expound on the idea. Is high-speed rail really the be-all, end-all, or is there other forms of public transit that can be helpful?
I think, the system that is being built very, very slowly in California has suffered a number of many predictable problems, some less predictable. But this is something we've also worked on at Reason Foundation for the past 2 decades, predicting many of these problems that we turned out to be a little more optimistic than reality. I do think that high-speed rail may serve but potentially some niche routes in the United States, but given the geography and population density, it's unlikely to serve nationwide customers, and I think that it's a mistake to oversell the potential of high-speed rail.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields. Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Regan, as Congress looks ahead to the next couple of years, one of the policy decisions we'll probably have a discussion about is this balance between federal funding, between capital and operations for transit. Now, currently, federal law allows rural and small urban transit agencies to use funds for operations, but doesn't allow transit agencies in large areas except for preventive maintenance. How would you suggest Congress look at this balance, recognizing there's perhaps a limited amount of dollars, as much as it is, still a limited amount in order to split between operating and capital?
Well, I think obviously there's going to be different needs in different communities. So I think we have to provide the opportunity for when there are grant funds for applicants to have to use their own discretion about what is the greatest need right now. I mean, if you're a community that needs more service or expanded service, you got plenty of buses, it doesn't make sense to invest in more buses. It makes sense to invest in more people that can operate those buses and maintain them. Certainly, I think that flexibility aspect is a critical aspect to this. And certainly, I think we should take a look at Mr. Johnson's bill that would provide a dedicated matching grant program that would allow agencies to apply specifically for operating assistance or operating support from the federal government.
Yeah. Ms. Maynard, do you have, from APTA's view, answer to my question?
I tend to agree with somewhat with what was previously stated. I think if you've seen one transit agency, you've seen one transit agency. And certainly for the rural providers that depend on the 5307, the federal grant funding for their operations is key for them. Over half the transit systems in the United States are run by smaller rural transit agencies. For the larger systems, particularly the legacy systems, I think there's that flexibility that is needed. You might find that one year you're going to invest, depending on your rolling stock capital replacement plan, on the capital you may need more that year or that quarter than the need for operating. I think on behalf of APTA, we certainly think that the flexibility is key, and that at this point we have not taken a formal position, but do believe it's important to have the discussion on ensuring that there is funding available for both.
Yeah. Ms. Hendricks, in Washington State, in fact, in my district, community transit, and I mentioned community transit a little bit in my opening statement, is doing a lot of different things, looking at different routes in order to accommodate the light rail that's coming in. they're expanding their BRT, bus rapid transit system as well, but they're also partnering with local communities on, it's not really microtransit as much as it's on-demand, transit on demand, but still kind of the same concept of about filling gaps. Could you chat a little bit about some of the drawbacks to microtransit, as well as you mentioned some of the benefits?
Yeah, when you think about microtransit, we have implemented microtransit as NATA, many of our members that operate for agencies. And at first, it appears that it could be more expensive per rider. But in fact, when you look at the allocation of the resources and you're replacing a smaller vehicle in some situations on demand with a large versus a large fixed route bus, it actually is balanced out on the cost and cost effective. And truly, the benefits of microtransit and on demand, more specifically, is allowing people to have access and connecting those individuals on that first and last mile to the public transit systems that are already in place. So we've seen benefits of that, as mentioned in my written testimony, in New York, for example, where we're doing 500 trips a day already, passenger per trip, and it hasn't increased our costs. It has increased the riderships, and it helped us regain ridership post the pandemic to connect people on that first and last mile to the infrastructure that exists within the public transit systems.
Yeah, thanks. I'll have some follow-up on that as well. Mr. Regan, back to you regarding the creation of joint labor management safety committees and better reporting on transit worker assaults. Has the implementation of these policies been successful, and what work needs to be done, not what's left, but what's next to improve safety?
Well, the final rule was just announced a month ago, so we have, it's wait and see how everything works. I think a key part is going to be the extent to which transit agencies embrace their labor partners on how to tackle this problem collaboratively. That's what the program was designed to do, to make sure that the people who are every day seeing the risks on the ground, in the buses, on the trains, in the stations, can provide that knowledge and expertise into the drafting of public transportation safety plans that protect both commuters and drivers. So for us, I think that we should be, I hope that agencies will view their labor partners and their workers as assets in this process about how do we tackle a very complicated problem, and one that so far has been eluded us, and also frankly provides a disincentive for people to ride the trains, or a disincentive for people to decide to apply for these jobs when what they hear about public transit is that it's a dangerous place to be.
Thank you. I don't yield back my negative 30 seconds.
We'll bank that for the next one. There you go. Mr. Stauber.
Mr. Larson, I'll just take your 30 seconds anyways. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate you having this meeting. I recently discussed crime on public transportation in another subcommittee hearing, but I think this discussion bears repeating. In the last few years, Minnesota, like many states, adopted policies that punished law enforcement and took away their resources. They complemented this with policies that extended leniency to criminal behavior, and now our public transit systems are a breeding ground for crime. Between January and April of 2024, Minnesota Metro Transit reports a total of 1,248 criminal incidents. This number includes 230 assaults, 457 drug offenses, and 299 destruction of property incidents. Instead of cracking down on the bad behavior, the Democrat trifecta in Minnesota, they took a different approach. Fare violations are now a $35 ticket instead of a $180 misdemeanor charge. And they've replaced police officers with full arrest powers with transit rider investment agents, trip agents, non-police agents who are to remind criminals of the behavior rules. These soft on crime policies are exactly why Metro Transit still only has half the ridership they did at pre-pandemic levels. Mr. Reagan, we've seen countless reports citing incidents in which bus and rail workers have been gruesomely attacked by unruly passengers, putting the safety of transit workers, commuters, and pedestrians at risk. Can you elaborate on how crime has impacted transit workers?
Well, in some cases, it's been, catastrophic. We've had members die on the job, attacked while driving a bus, for example. In other cases, it is, the broader trend. In my view, as I just mentioned, it is a deterrent towards doing the hiring, meeting the hiring goals that transit agencies all across the country are meeting here. So I am encouraged by what the Federal Transit Administration released about a month ago, the passenger safety and transit safety plans.
Are you going to request police officers with full arrest powers or people that just remind people of bad behavior?
We have not taken a position on that moving forward.
So let me ask you this, are you saying your union workers are okay with reminding people of bad behavior?
Again, we have not taken a position. That's not something, what I hear from our members is they want more active engagement from their employers, from their agencies, to make sure that their concerns and their needs are being met when they're on the job. We are in the process of engaging with them in this process, and the federal government is providing good leadership when it comes to the real safety concerns on board these buses and transit systems.
You know, Representative Quigley and I went to the Metra in Chicago, very impressive. I don't think those union workers would be okay with people, trip agents being, quote, reminders to criminals of their bad behavior, assaulting your workers. I, along with several members of this committee, have attempted to communicate with the Federal Transit Administration the dangers that our transit workers and law-abiding citizens face on transit. Have you felt that your expressed concerns have been heard by the agency? Because I feel that Congress has been ignored.
I certainly, during the rulemaking process for the passenger and transportation worker safety plans that were just released, we had extensive conversations with them, and a lot of our concerns were met. The original version was not quite what we would have envisioned, what we would have liked. The final version certainly met a lot more of our needs that are binding in terms of worker engagement with their employers, ensuring that we can develop these plans. And by the way, I think more importantly, having we need to have more information, more data about where the risk factors are and where the problems are. And these safety plans that are going to be developed with worker input will help allow us to make further steps down the road to try to address some of those problems.
How long do you think before that safety plan will be implemented?
Well, there are requirements on all of the transit agencies to adopt these plans. I think it will vary depending on which agency and how they're going to engage in the process. But we intend to hold everyone accountable because our members' lives and well-being are at risk.
Yeah, and I agree with you. We talked safety. It's first, second, third priority, and I appreciate that. But I don't think your union members would be okay with reminders or transit trip agents for violent behavior. I think that's what gives our transit a bad name. Well, I yield back.
Violent behavior is a crime.
Gentleman is yielded. Ms. Napolitano.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Reagan and Ms. Maynard, along that line, in the bipartisan infrastructure law, we improved the funding and requirements for the installation of protective shields in buses to prevent assaults on bus drivers. How has this provision been implemented? Have there been obstacles to improving safety measures in these buses? And I know I have calls for increased security shields. Can you address that? Would you?
Increased security? Yes, of course. I think, we have long called for reimagining these for drivers, this is their workspace. What does their workspace look like? How do we make sure that not only are they protected on the job, but also, in some cases, it's about protecting pedestrians, making sure that blind spots are eliminated, making sure that there's better visibility for on oftentimes very busy streets. But yeah, I think the workplace for these transit operators needs to be improved and needs to make sure that they are protected on the job.
Ms. Maynard?
Thank you for the question. On behalf of the industry, it's very, very important that we listen to the operators, as it's very important that we listen to our customers in terms of how they feel safe when they don't feel safe. In Las Vegas, we were one of the first in the United States to add driver enclosures. We did that in 2016. We meet regularly with our union employees to understand what they need to feel more safe, as well as our passengers. We've been given great advice from the operators. To Ms. Regan's point, it is their workspace, And whether it's devising a system that's fully enclosed but has a window that they can open up so it can speak to the passengers, we get the feedback from those operators. But we saw over a 70% decline in incidents occurring in our vehicles when we installed driver enclosures. And so the industry itself, again, is listening to what their employees want and asking our bus manufacturing partners to start designing better enclosures that can be part of the bus build.
More protective?
Yes. I'm sorry?
More protective?
More protected, exactly.
Because we provided funding and requirements for the installation of protective shields, but we have no record of whether it's been enough or whether it's more required.
If I'm hearing you correctly, the OEMs, the bus manufacturers, that wasn't something that was, you could buy off the shelf, if you will. But because of the feedback from the drivers, and certainly part of it came from the pandemic in terms of just wanting that protection between yourself and the customers, it really has proven to be a great safety technique. And so there's a manufacturer here in the United States that is building a really great shield. AeroGuard is the name of the company, and we are working closely with the bus manufacturers to make that part of the bus build because those shields do work.
And how is the transit agency and other agencies dealing with the rising level of homelessness on transit? And what are the policies the transit agencies are implementing to deal with the issue? What is the cost for the transit agencies to address the issue?
I thank you for that question. And again, something that I think a lot of systems around the U.S. are doing. Philadelphia, SEPTA has done a great job. This, again, what happens in any urban city is spilling over and happening on transit. And so, again, a very complex issue, and this is about working closely with their social service agencies. For example, in Las Vegas, we work with the city of Las Vegas and Clark County. They have a team that comes out once a month or twice a month to meet directly with passengers that need social services, housing recommendation, addiction counseling, things like that. So again, it takes, and it's part of partnership with our law enforcement.
Yes, you addressed it a little bit. Ms. Maynard and Mr. Reagan, my district in Sacramento Valley has major transit lines, including Foothill Transit, Metro, and New Metro Gold Line. And the constituents prefer to use transit. Some still live and work too far from major transit lines. How are you improving first and last mile connections? As Ms. Hendricks indicated, more should be done. What more can be done?
Yes, as I spoke earlier, what we can do is implement an on-demand or microtransit service that's provided. It's a smaller vehicle where we can have designated pickup points and allow people to then connect to the transit system that's in place so everyone can have access to the essential services needed in our community. So we've seen that to be a great solution, and we think that that will continue to develop as we emerge into changing and adapting to the new needs of public transit within our cities.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So much of the money and the attention around public transit goes to metropolitan areas. Obviously, transit is pretty important for rural areas as well, particularly for older Americans and for those with disabilities. That's why I was so grateful, Ms. Maynard, that in your testimony you did talk about some of what's going on in rural transit, particularly with regard to folks with disabilities. So put a little bit more meat on that bone. Talk to us about the challenges that transit providers face in rural America that they don't face in big cities.
Thank you for that question, and I have to agree with you. When you talk about fixed route, I think generally comes to mind first and foremost is the able-bodied, the person that can get on a bus and go to work. But public transit, we do so much more than that. Paratransit is a big part of what we do, ensuring the disabled community has the same access, the same access as everybody else to where they need to go. We know that rural transit agencies utilize public transit for the disabled community 50% more than other transit systems. And so
Okay, say that again. I want to make sure we're all hearing that.
So rural transit systems, their disabled community, they take transit 50% more than your urbanized systems. It's very important. It is a connection sometimes to, and I don't want to sound dramatic here, but to life. It is making sure that they get to where they need to go. And so,
Healthcare and employment particularly, if you don't have access to those things, it is really hard to live a full life.
that is correct. In Las Vegas, as an example, our rural provider, Southern Nevada Transit Coalition, we RTC are the local match. If not for the local match, the rural transit agencies have a very difficult time ensuring that funding is available to meet the needs of their rural residents. And so that
So let's
partnership-
talk about that funding. I would imagine that with FTA, so many of the grants are probably written with metropolitan systems in mind. Again, that's where most of the ridership and most of the dollars are. Are there things we can do to make sure that rural systems have a fair shake at FTA, or do you think things are good as they are?
I think that funding is critical now. You know, I came to the RTC 17 years ago. Prior to that, I was in the private sector. My job was to make money for the businesses that I worked in. I was surprised when I started working in transit that we don't make money. The model is one that expenses will always exceed revenues. And it is that public good serving customers in rural and urban areas that matter. And so that funding is not only the federal level, it's the state level, the local level. It's a three-pronged approach, if you will. But you can't say enough for, again, that funding it's necessary and it's ongoing and it could be better. And so to make it better, again, it's gonna require a price.
And almost certainly making sure that folks who are writing the eligibility criteria are keeping rural systems in mind, because again, it looks very different. We've had some conversation about micro-transit today. I'm grateful for that. Ms. Hendricks, you've talked a bit about that as well. So from either of you, other things we should keep in mind with regard to, and I assume people who are moving toward micro-transit or in rural areas are also doing some fixed route. Talk to me about that transition. How far along are we? What will the next few years look like?
Well, in Southern Nevada, we had an area in Southern Nevada that was one of the fastest growing for 6+ years. We did not have funding to add transit there. Even though we got calls from residents and businesses, hey, I need transit for my employees, that sort of thing. And so we used some of the federal funding. We looked at this area and decided, we did a cost analysis. Should we apply fixed route and your traditional paratransit service in this area, or do we do microtransit? And our approach is sort of a love all, serve all. On one bus, on demand, we are moving seniors, students, paratransit customers, and fixed route customers. And that model has turned out to be cost effective. We're spending less in that model than we are in traditional fixed route of paratransit. So I think
a huge success story. Let's give Ms. Hendricks 30 seconds here.
Yes, similar to what Ms. Maynard said, I think when you look at commingling the services that are available, and there's also enhanced technology platforms that we've recently, some of our NATA members have implemented that allow you to do more on-demand and effective routing and scheduling and commingling those riderships in the same vehicle, that it remains cost-effective, but it increases the availability and access to those that are most need. So we're looking at that. We've, again, one of our NATA members in Lubbock, Texas, has implemented that with the proper software for RATP Dev, and it's really working effectively to maintain the same amount of cost or cost-effective, but increase ridership.
Well said. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields, Mr. DeSaulnier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member, and thank you to the witnesses. Start with Mr. Reagan. As you know, Mr. Reagan, I represent a urban-suburban district in the East Bay of the San Francisco Bay Area. COVID has changed our world. We have the General Accounting Office working in my office with a study about the 10 largest metropolitan areas, so sort of the opposite of the last comments, where 65% of the U.S. GDP is. All of those areas, and particularly in California, where we're trying to transition from a car culture and 4-bedroom, 2-bath houses to higher density and higher transit ridership in the Bay Area. For years, we've aimed to try to get to 10% peak trips on transit. We have diminishing returns on transit agencies and democracy, sort of the opposite of Los Angeles. But when we look at New York or London at 90%, and for climate change, our black box for emissions, that's where our biggest challenge is. And then along comes COVID. The tradition, and because of our tax structure in California and Prop 13, it doesn't reward local municipalities to provide housing. They get money from commercial development and retail. Well, that's all changed. In the last 2 weeks, there was a study by the Bay Area Council, and again, we're probably an example of this, but it's happening in all these DC, Boston, New York, Chicago, Atlanta, that a survey of the major employers in the Bay Area, in San Francisco, but also in Silicon Valley and the business parks in the East Bay, the overwhelming number of largest employers say we're going to 3 days in office a week. The quality of life for people who have to commute an hour, 2 hours from the far edges of my district, the financial district of Silicon Valley, is greatly enhanced by that one of those two incomes being home with their kids. So that's the new reality. The San Francisco Chronicle did a story yesterday, and I think it was the Bay Area Council did this too, that they estimated it would be 20 to 30 years before the occupancy rate in San Francisco would return to where it was pre-COVID. So we spent a lot of time in California doing 410s, trying to get people to do 410s. We changed labor law. Now we've sort of got a gift when it comes to quality of life and emissions reductions and greater efficiencies, but we've got these infrastructure opportunities that unfortunately the MPO, which I used to be on, and the transit agencies want to keep spending money the way they always did. Like we're at 40% at BART of pre. It's not going to get back to 100% fare box recovery in the near future. So being a friend of labor, ATU and operating engineers, how do we make this work and protect rank and file, but also protect the working people who are trying to get transit and be flexible, knowing the traditional heavy investments like the extension of BART in the Silicon Valley, we're going to do that, but we've got to look at it differently, in a different way than we ever have. How do we do that in a collaborative fashion where we're really efficient about this? And I'd be happy to listen to any of the model has changed for 65% of the GDP in this country.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think that where we've seen some successful transitions from major transit aid organizations, and I mentioned this in my oral testimony, places like Atlanta that are looking at where their demand is. How do we evaluate our routes, both for bus and transit, and also our timing? If the traditional Monday and Friday 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. rush hours are no longer going to be the primary driver of ridership, how are we going to meet the demands of people in our communities? And I think you're seeing it in places like Washington, D.C., for example, where you're not seeing as much of the peak hour traffic, but you're seeing increased traffic at other times during the week, whether it be more people using the metro to come in on the weekends and visit our lovely museum systems here in the city. So I think as transit agencies look at their resources and look at how they're allocating their routes, their ridership, and how they can take the people that are, they're professionals who are operating these systems and allocate their expertise and their resources to better meet their growing demands. But I think that takes work. That takes work for people to study what is actually the demand in their communities right now.
And I've heard that argument in California. However, that's a small number of what our fare box recovery was. I mean, it's 1 or 2% potentially. So the model is still, we can't keep doing things the way we always did. We have to adapt to that, but it's not an answer to what we've lost on the peak in terms of fare box recovery.
Well, but part of it also is you need to have a system that will draw people in to the ridership as well. I mean, we saw it in California, in LA, one of their major lines, they operated 30-minute service. Every 30 minutes you're going to operate, and they saw their ridership increase by 17%. So when you have a reliable service, you're going to see a lot more people that are going to be drawn to that as an option, as opposed to trying to drive or spend $60 on a ride share. Yet you're going to see more people as an opportunity.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Mr. Van Drew.
Thank you, Chairman. And just before I begin, I want to associate myself with the remarks of Congressman Stober, who just spoke a little while before. I would maintain whether you are union, non-union, whether you are a passenger, whether you are a repair person, just an American, whether you're a resident, people want to be safe. And some of the attitudes and philosophies, unfortunately, in some areas, and they are unfortunate because we no longer enforce the law. When people do bad things, when they commit crimes, they have to be punished. That's just fair. that's fair and equitable justice. So I think Mr. Stauber brought some good points out. But I'm not here to speak about that. I'm going to ask forgiveness from my colleagues on both sides of the aisle because I'm going to speak a little bit in a parochial way. I'm going to speak about southern New Jersey. For those of you who are familiar at all, southern New Jersey is much different than the northern part of the state, which is very compressed, very packed, which is the suburbs of New York City. Southern New Jersey is beach and bay, even rural. We have lots of farmland. And of course, I have the largest congressional district geographically in the state of New Jersey. It's almost half of the state. And my district has perpetually been suffering from a lack of access to public transportation. We're seeing the most impact of this is people's ability to get to their doctors, to get to their pharmacies, to get to their grocery stores. It's real, and it's a problem. I know it's not easy because it costs a lot of money. But coupling this with the concern of small and local physicians and pharmacies, their doors are closing, many of them. It's changed. They're big centers. Many people, or especially the older population, are traveling greater distances than ever before. So over the years, I've personally worked with groups such as the South Jersey Transportation Planning Organization, New Jersey Transit, to address these concerns, but I want to push it a little further. Believe it or not, I want to learn. So at this time, I'm asking all of you for any suggestions, all of you in your field, to provide guidance, suggestions, assistance, whatever we can do at the federal level to bring more public transportation to my home and my district of South Jersey. It still matters there. We have many people who retire there from the city of Philadelphia, from other areas. During the summer season, it's not as much of an issue because the routes have increased our population in some of our towns by July 4th, because we're so tourist-driven, goes up tenfold sometimes. So are questions that we can now start from the beginning, just go right through. Are there any specific groups that you all think that my team should be working with? What avenues have you seen to be most successful? Dusty touched on it a little bit, Congressman Johnson, I should say, in public transportation in rural areas. What are the strategies to make this better? Not every town is a teeming city. There are places that are more spread out and more rural. So I appreciate you being here. I appreciate your advice. I really mean it. So I'm going to start with you and go right on down the line.
Thank you. Everything you said, it is, we see it. Ridership is important, but how you connect people to where they need to go, those critical services, particularly in rural areas, is real. And through the funding that we receive, because the way that FTA works, we're considered an urbanized transit system, and so our funding comes through 5307. The rural transit systems are funded under a different category, if you will, and I think it's taking a look at, again, how that, we work closely with our rural provider and understand the challenges that they have, and again, many times, every single year, we invest in that rural transit system in the spirit of partnership, knowing that the needs of those in the rural community are real. They have a difficult time getting, like to your point, to a pharmacy, to a doctor's office just to get groceries. And so a suggestion I would make, again, is looking at that funding piece that goes to the rural portion and understanding if it's adequate. From what I've been told, at least from our rural provider, it's a challenge. And so funding continues to be a challenge, not only in the urbanized areas, but also in the rural areas. And you'll hear me say this again and again. If you've seen one transit system, you've seen one transit system. They are all funded differently. It is that three-legged stool. So at the local level, if it's sales tax or property tax, that varies all across the United States. And the level of funding that you get from the local or state level will depend on how much service you're going to provide. Fair revenues only cover about 30% of operating. And that's across the board. And so, again, it is looking at that when you invest in transit, you're investing in the economy, you're investing in the quality of life for people in your community. So it is looking, again, at those funding levels, and are they adequate to even meet the needs of your community, those rural community residents, and working closely with the FTA in terms of those funding mechanisms that are specifically addressed for rural transit agencies.
So I thank you. It was a good answer, and you ended up speaking for everybody, but that's good. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Ms. Titus.
Well, thank you very much. MJ, I was proud to join you and the Federal Transit Administration when we announced the $150 million that we got from the bipartisan infrastructure law. for the Maryland Parkway corridor. Thank you for mentioning that. You know, I've represented that area for 11 years. It goes right through the heart of the district, right through the heart of the valley. People are going to school, they're going to the hospital, they're going to the airport, they're going downtown, they're going to work on the Strip. It's an amazing corridor. I can go on and on about it, but you're the representative from APTA, not just from RTC. So could you speak to the value of the CIG program for improving and providing transit options for people all over the country?
Congressman, I just have to acknowledge that you know more about your district than it's impressive. And you are right. Actually, Maryland Parkway, the BRT, that without that $150 million investment, that was a match. We came up with our local match in order to receive that funding. It was a competitive grant. Your hard work helped us deliver on that. It is serving one of the busiest corridors in Nevada. It is going to revitalize the entire area, enhanced shelters, shade structures, wider sidewalks, better lighting. The CIG program is critical for ensure that you can not only improve your existing service, but to also expand and modernize. And that's exactly the CIG program that transit systems around the United States are looking to use it for, again, is to expand and or improve. The FTA has more requests than they have funding available. The CIG program, the BIL, both are oversubscribed to a certain degree. More transit systems need the resources than there are funding available. So it's critically important as a way to ensure that we are expanding, growing, modernizing, and improving the services that we have in our communities today.
Well, thank you, and thank you for doing that. I want to talk about the tax on transit workers. We see that increasingly. It's been mentioned. I know that the FTA has approved a general directive on transit worker assaults. Mr. Reagan, can you address that? Do you support this directive? Are there other things that Congress could do to help develop that policy or protect these people who are on the front lines and really have no control over who might get on their bus, especially?
Yeah, thank you. And yes, we very much support the rule that was released just a month ago. In fact, I was happy to go join the FTA in Indianapolis for the rollout of this rule. As I mentioned earlier, I think how effective it's going to be is going to depend on the full buy-in of the agencies across the country about how seriously they're going to take these safety committees and how readily they're going to embrace their unions and their workers as partners and as valuable resources and assets in terms of developing policies that will protect both their employees as well as passengers in these systems.
Yeah, some of the violence that you see on buses is between passengers, not the passenger and the bus driver, but they have to take some responsibility there and often get involved in that.
That is absolutely right. And again, the workers, the bus drivers are the ones who see where these tripwires are, where you have the problems, where the potential conflicts arise from. And so their insight in terms of how we can try to address this through policy, through design, through fare services, all of that, the worker voice needs to be part of it because they are the ones who see all of this stuff going down. They're the ones who can help identify where the risk factors are.
Ms. Maynard, do you all, from your side of things, work with your bus drivers and people on the front lines to come up with this policy?
Absolutely. You've got to go to where the experts are, boots on the ground, if you will. When we make those decisions, and not just we, RTC, but the industry itself is very involved in ensuring that again, the partnership with your employees, the partnership with law enforcement, the partnership with social services, that it all matters. You can't make a decision in this silo. And so understanding what the drivers need, and the passengers too. We talk to the passengers to understand what they need to feel more safe, but certainly we could not do, we have not only RTC, but systems around the United States have those regular meetings, safety meetings, where they talk to the drivers and the operators. What can we do to support you? So it is a partnership in addressing something, again, that's very complex.
Just as a quick aside, one of the programs you have with the buses in Las Vegas that I think is great is in conjunction with the public libraries, so that when you get on the bus, you can connect to the public library. You can read, you can hear music, you can browse the catalog. That keeps maybe riders occupied and busy.
That's right.
Too.
We have a library on the go. You can download a library book or music when you're riding our system.
It's great. Thank you.
Gentleman yields. Mr. Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. This is an important hearing regarding the lessons learned by transit agencies during and after the pandemic. And nowhere is transit more important than in New Jersey. This vital method of transportation became more evident when New York City decided to implement the Central Business District tolling program. It is good that Governor Hochul decided to indefinitely postpone the implementation of this congestion pricing plan. From the very beginning, I and many of my colleagues in New Jersey and around New York City have advocated for the cancellation of the congestion pricing plan, a plan that was and is deeply flawed, unfair, and simply a money grab on New Jerseyans. Last year, I was proud to co-sponsor and support in this committee HRS 609, expressing strong opposition to this misguided plan. And as a member of the Anti-Congestion Tax Caucus, this indefinite postponement is a win for all New Jerseyans. And I will work across the aisle to make sure this plan is never implemented. Ms. Maynard, as you doubtless know, crime has been on the rise in transit systems across the country. Many of my own constituents have been in touch to complain about conditions on trains and around stations. What effect have you seen this increased crime having on post-pandemic recovery plans and efforts to increase ridership?
Congressman, thank you for that question. I think it's had, again, a very large impact in every urban setting. This is not necessarily a transit problem. This is a problem that is occurring in urban cities. And again, transit is a rolling microcosm of what is happening in any urban city. And if crime is increasing, the homeless, unhoused population is increasing, drug addiction, mental illness, things of that nature, if that is occurring in the city, you will see it on public transit. We are an open space, a public space. And so again, it's working. I have in Las Vegas personally worked closely with our sheriff. Their police department, they're understaffed at this point, but they have been great partners. They are helping to address some of the crime that is occurring within the urban core and at our stations. And it is, again, it's a very complex problem. It takes that partnership of law enforcement, your own security services, technology, using data. We are the first in the United States to...
I'm sorry, if I may. Do you see a relationship between fare evasion and these trends of increased crime?
I think fare evasion has always been a challenge and an opportunity for transit systems. I think the way, again, when you talk about a legacy system, cities that are literally built like yours, built around public transit, maybe some of the technology, I know they're making technology improvements in terms of fare evasion. Here in Washington, they're doing a great job in increasing or stabilizing the fare gates, and I think they've seen this over 70%. So to answer your question directly there, I think again, it's been a challenge for transit systems since we started operating. It's something that we work on every single day.
Thank you. Mr. Regan, we know that the pandemic has had dramatic effects on transit operations and workforce. How have TTD union members weathered these past 4 years as far as pandemic-related changes to systems, services, and operations? And with these broader trends in mind, are TTD union members being provided the training they need to be successful in transit systems well into the future?
Thank you for the question. How we adapted, I think, frankly, without the support of the federal support for transit systems across the country, I think we would have been in really big trouble coming out of the pandemic when ridership dropped. I think there was a recognition broadly on both sides of the aisle that these systems are vital to keeping our communities moving during a catastrophic time. We're making sure that grocery workers and doctors and everybody else were able to use transit to get to work to provide the vital services we needed. Moving forward, I think that there is a need to adapt. There is certainly going to be a need to identify where ridership trends are going and how we're going to adjust to a new working world that we're in here. But Thankfully, because of federal protections like 13C, there are requirements that when we have investments from the federal government into local communities, that we must protect those workers so they can't just be outsourced, they can't just have their wages and benefits cut, and that they must be provided training if they are going to be transitioned to a different part of the transit agency. So I think it's a vital part of this moving forward.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Mr. Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Crawford. Appreciate all the witnesses here today, and Ranking Member Norton for holding this hearing. We are well aware that transit agencies across the country, and including the Memphis Area Transit Authority, also known as MATA, which is in my district, face challenges in funding their operating expenses with fares. I recognize that increased federal funding for operating expenses risks a deficit for capital expenses. This is precedented as funding for the FAA has historically prioritized the agency's operations account at the expense of its facilities and equipment account. But public transit systems are expensive to run, and they should be funded by a partnership between agencies, local and state and federal governments. That's why I'm pleased to co-sponsor with my friend Representative Hank Johnson the Stronger Communities Through Better Transit Act, which would take a balanced approach to remedy operating expense shortfalls without diverting too much funding away from capital expenses. I understand the history of it, and I understand the thoughts. But if we put all this money in the capital, and we don't have people riding, we're not using the capital. And we've got to have the system work, and that's going to take fares and other investments to make sure we have public transit systems. Mr. Regan, some would argue that public transit is a local problem or a local issue, and its operating expenses should be funded locally. Could you elaborate on how the benefits of public transit go beyond just its surface area and why federal and state funding could be helpful to the whole region?
Yes, and thank you for the question. I mean, we've recognized for over 60 years that public transit is a national interest, that we have a responsibility to provide federal support for these programs. They keep our economies moving. They provide vital services for people, whether they are elderly, disabled, or just are unable to afford a car, to get to where they need to be, whether it be to jobs, to medical appointments,
groceries.
Exactly. And so, we have a requirement to support these communities, whether they are large or small, to ensure that they have the resources they need to provide a vital public service to their constituents.
My city, like many major urban areas, have lots of food deserts. So people do have problems getting to a grocery store, and they need public transit, and it takes a long time, and for their health care appointments, because there are health care deserts. It's an issue the federal government should be involved in, state governments, in my opinion. Supposing that they were expanded, the federal funding for operating expenses, how can we ensure that agencies don't simply shift funds around and take capital expenses, take it out of capital expenses and increase this backlog?
Well, I think one way to do it is that you have separate pots of money. So you have different grant programs where you can apply for operating assistance through one pool of money, and you can apply for capital through another pool of money. That provides agencies with the flexibility they need to identify what their needs are at the moment. Whether it is, there may be in a situation where we just need to refleet our bus program, and that capital expense is going to be vital for them to do that. There may be other situations where there's a shortfall, there's a gap in their funding, and they need to have operating assistance, or they need to be able to expand services to areas that are being underserved, in which case you can apply for an operating assistance grant. So there are different ways to do it, so you're ensuring that people are actually being targeted to what the needs of the agencies are in that moment.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Maynard, you are not only Vegas, but also the American Public Transportation Association representative here. Do you believe that it would be helpful to many communities to have federal funding available for operating funds, expenses, as well as capital?
Thank you, Chris, for that question. On behalf of APTA, we've listened to the members. Again, it's very important. You have some of the smaller rural transit systems that absolutely rely on the operating assistance, so they can use their federal funding for operating. Where urbanized, it's much more restricted. I think it really, first and foremost, you've got to make sure that whether it's a rail car, a bus, light rail, You've got to make sure that's in good working order, so it's reliable, so that it can pick up those folks and take them where they need to go. So it is really a balance, and I think that flexibility is important. Some agencies will find, based on their capital replacement program, the timeline that they need to invest in capital rather than potentially add a new route. So again, it is that flexibility that I think is key. We continue to listen to the members of APTA. We haven't taken a formal position, but do believe flexibility is very important in this category.
Do you have any idea what percentage of public transit authorities are able to run on just their fares?
That would be zero. Again, it's a business. It does not generate a profit. It never. That's just the way it is a public good, similar to how we're funding roadways and aviation and public safety. It's an investment in transit. It's an investment in your community.
Thank you, ma'am, and thank you to the whole panel.
Gentleman yields. Mr. Kiley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A paradox of the modern history of our country is that we are on the leading edge in so many ways when it comes to technology and innovation, and yet our large-scale public infrastructure, with public transit being a clear example, often lags behind the rest of the developed world. It can just be an unpleasant experience for people. It's unsafe. It's unreliable, but then you go to other developed countries and you see they have really well-functioning and widely used public transportation systems. I mean, if you look just, for example, at the San Francisco Bay Area, this is a region surrounded by, populated by the most innovative companies in the history of the world, and then you get on Muni or BART, the public transit systems, and it's very antiquated and often not a good experience. It doesn't get you where you need to be in an efficient manner. So I guess my question is, maybe for you, Mr. Scribner, is what can we learn here from places that actually do public transportation better across the world?
Well, setting aside the differences in income and sort of the urban geography, I think one thing they do much better than the United States is leverage innovative procurement methods. So there's a lot more, you see a lot more public-private partnerships in providing competitive contracting, that service. And I think that lends itself to innovative technologies. So, where in the United States we have no heavy rail systems that are fully automated. I mean, where we see automated rail systems is primarily at airports. That is now standard practice around the world. New lines being built, fully automated, and we're just not seeing that there because I think we're stuck in the 1960s. We have 60-year-old transit laws that really haven't been modernized, and that is not the approach they have taken in Europe and in Asia and in other places where transit is much more robust and much higher quality.
So they've just incorporated better technology into their infrastructure because they've been continually updating and modernizing.
I think through providing the incentives for under competitive contracting, that creates that incentive to drive innovation. And I think that's why you see a lot more interesting things coming out of those countries in the transit realm than in the United States.
So on that point of sort of modernizing technology, I mean, we have in the U.S. Been leading the way when it comes to innovation in transportation in a lot of other ways. I mean, our companies have pioneered electric vehicles, autonomous vehicles. In San Francisco right now, Waymo has a network of self-driving cars, and there's every indication that autonomy is going to become more and more widely adopted in terms of the number of folks. And there's all kinds of models about how is this going to affect car ownership. So in that context of changing transportation technology and potentially huge changes in car ownership and other methods by which people just go about their daily life, how should we be thinking of the next generation of public transit in that context, in terms of demand, in terms of the available options?
Well, I think we've heard from some of the other witnesses discussion around microtransit, and I think those kinds of, we may not need, the 40-foot bus may not be the future of transit in America. So I think looking at different vehicle sizes, different operating models, focusing more on on-demand service, really trying to get at the being closer to private vehicle service, because what private vehicles offer, and which is why the vast majority, more than 90% of households have cars today, is because it provides much better access to the surrounding area. And I think for transit to compete, it needs to try to take on some of those characteristics that cause the vast majority of Americans to not choose transit.
You've spoken to this, Ms. Hendricks, today as well. Do you have anything to add or any other sort of next generation transportation technologies or ideas that it's important for us to keep in mind when thinking about public transportation?
Yeah, I think it's been mentioned before, the ability to adapt to the current realities and the futures starting with network design, understanding where people are residing and where they're moving to is the first key. So really focusing on the network design in order to have the most safe, reliable, and on time, right? To get people into public transit, it needs to be safe, it needs to be reliable. So when you look at the future, as I mentioned in my testimony from representing NATA, the more microtransit on demand that allows people to connect to the larger cities and the urban areas of the public transit systems is one method to do that. I think partnering with our labor partners as well to understand and get their input, because I agree that the people closest to the position understands. So we need to listen to where the driver's input is. But I think looking at the shift, it will require a collaborative effort amongst many, including our public agencies and our partners, to ensure that we have the right vehicle in the right place at the right time that's going to be safe and reliable to enhance ridership and reduce the congestion that's currently involved in many of our major cities.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Mr. Menendez.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses. The COVID-19 pandemic rapidly changed our day-to-day lives, especially how we work and commute. During the pandemic, modified work schedules dramatically decreased transit ridership levels. While we've recently seen positive trends that show ridership bouncing back, commuting trends in the post-pandemic world are still different, and transit agencies are still struggling with budgetary shortfalls. It's not just transit agencies that are struggling, but many companies that provide shared ride services, such as bus companies that service regular routes and coach and charter bus services. These are often small businesses that provide a critical service who have struggled during the pandemic and are still struggling today. In New Jersey's 8th Congressional District, A&C Bus Line, a private bus company, announced the termination of its Jersey City routes. This could have left residents in our district with fewer transit options if it weren't for New Jersey Transit swiftly stepping up to provide services on these routes. And we look forward to continuing to work with all of our partners to ensure we are providing a reliable, quality, safe commuting experience for all of our residents. Ms. Manyard, can you talk about how transit agencies are addressing small-scale transit needs and what Congress can do to help transit agencies in this effort? And I know it's been touched on during the course of this hearing, but sort of thinking about how sort of the universe of the commuters it's serving in a densely populated area like the 8th Congressional District in New Jersey, and sort of what tailored solutions might be available to public transit agencies as they think about the pathway forward.
Congressman, thank you for that question. I think it's going to be dependent on where you are. So if you've got a large city like whether it's New Jersey or New York, Chicago, and you've got multiple modes of transportation, you've got commuter rail, light rail, heavy rail, you've got a bus system, paratransit. I don't think you can have enough options in understanding what your community needs.
And how do you think, in thinking about the existing infrastructure and making sure that we have an integrated transit system, should we be thinking about where there's gaps currently in service, or should we be thinking about what we may need to replace or modify within the existing structure, or just building new structures around the existing infrastructure?
Quite frankly, it's both.
Yeah.
I think you need to understand where the gaps are. I mean, an integrated system is the best system for your community. And I think understanding where those gaps are, that is our job. Our job is to take a look at the customers that we're serving, where they are, where they're going, and how do we adequately assign the assets that we have to ensure that we're meeting, to the best of our abilities, the community. And in some cases, again, I think it takes a village, if you will. It isn't just one mode. It isn't just the bus. It's not just the rail. You have to understand the layout of your city. Las Vegas is very car-centric, and so the way that our agency may look at implementing public transit and those connections or gaps could be very different to what you see in the large urban core cities.
Sure, I appreciate that. Mr. Regan, your testimony touches on several workforce challenges that transit agencies are facing. Can you talk about what transit agencies and other transit providers can do to recruit and retain a robust transit workforce?
Thank you. First of all, I think implementing strongly these new safety plans is going to be a key part of that. There is no worse recruiting tool than the media reports we see of bus drivers getting beat up or spit on or ultimately or even killed in terms of bringing people into this workforce. And I think, frankly, a lot of advertisement about this. These are good middle-class jobs that you can raise your family on. They have good health care benefits. That's an important aspect. And most of the members and every member that I represent that I speak to is very proud of the role they play in this community. And so I think exposing more people to that is going to help bring more people into the workforce. But we are facing a cliff, let's be honest. I think a huge percentage of the workers are eligible to retire within the next 5 years, and we need to get going to make it a safer working environment and to make sure that we have more people have access to these great jobs.
And listen, the safety is a priority of ours. As you know, last year we led a bipartisan coalition of 114 members in a letter to the FDA calling for them to take action on transit worker assaults because it is a problem, especially in this post-COVID environment. And we all agree that these essential public servants deserve a safe working environment. Can you talk about how transit worker assaults impact worker recruitment and retention to follow up to sort of your previous answer?
Yeah, it couldn't be a worse effect on recruiting people into the industry. When people are afraid to go to the office, nobody wants to feel that. That's not a good advertisement. And again, I think we have to address the safety problems. I think we need to, really robustly implement the safety plans that have been now required. And then we have to start getting to work to educating people on what the benefits are of this industry and how vital it is and what a good job it can be for you.
Listen, I look forward to partnering with you on that and thankful for all the essential workers that you represent. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Mr. D'Esposito.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. In 2011, Nassau County, the county that I'm proud to represent in New York, privatized our public transportation system, the largest public transportation provider ever to make this transition. In just over 3 months that year, the workers represented by TWU Local 252 and the new contractor, Viola, which is now Transdev, were able to negotiate and implement a new collective bargaining agreement that sustained all 900 workers and ultimately expanded transit service in our area. That success would not have been possible were it not for the federal transit worker protections, also known as 13C protections. The TWU and Viola were allowed to come together under the auspices of the 13C negotiations to get this done in a process that would not have been possible under the National Labor Relations Act. Ms. Hendricks, Transdev is the contractor for the Nassau Intercounty Express, we call the NICE bus. I've heard from Transport Workers Union that they have had a great working relationship with you in that system. Would you agree that you have a solid working partnership with the workforce on Long Island?
Absolutely. We pride ourselves in working with our frontline team members and our labor partners as well. They provide the services that make our jobs possible. We don't forget that. And I think to recruit and retain the best talent possible, as we've been able to do in NICE Bus and Services Long Island, it's to ensure that we continue to connect our frontline team members to the purpose that we serve and making a difference in the lives of others, providing public transportation to get them to essential services. So we do have a strong relationship with our labor partners and, more importantly, with our frontline team members who come to work every day to service our communities.
And when Transdev takes over a transit system like you did in Nassau County years ago, you do so knowing that these 13C protections are in place for the workers, correct?
Absolutely. We abide by all federal law and regulations, yes.
And do you still make a profit providing transit service as a third-party contractor?
We do make a profit as providing a third-party service contractor.
Okay, and now just going back for a second to your relationship that you foster with the frontline workers. We are obviously a county, and my district borders Queens and New York City, which, obviously the NYPD is doing all they can to fight crime. In Nassau County, the Nassau County Police Department continues to work each and every day to keep our community safe. What, if anything, could be done? Obviously, we know that the legislation put forth by the state legislature, criminal justice reform, cashless bail, has seen a rise in certain crimes, especially those that are being arrested and then released to commit more crimes. But what can we do? What have you done with your frontline workers to, I know as Mr. Regan had mentioned, what are you doing to keep that frontline staff safe, and what can we do on a federal level to work with you to make sure that when they go to work each and every day, they are kept safe?
Yeah. I think there's several things that we've done, particularly coming out of COVID, where we've seen the increase. One is the protections that Ms. Maynard mentioned before in the buses and ensuring there's protection there. But in addition to that, we have, in most buses representing NATA, not just TransDev here today, but the North American Transit Alliance for the 5 largest private operators, where the buses are installed with a alert button so that if there is any activity on the bus, that the driver can notify and hit the alarm system that's going to notify dispatch or the local authorities immediately to respond. But we also, for our frontline workers, we have training, which is workplace violence, the de-escalation training, and active shooter training. So we are continuously putting all of our frontline team members through that training that helps them better prepared to meet the situations that are unknown or uncertain in today's society.
And obviously with that training, and I know the answer specifically in Nassau County is yes, but I'm assuming in other places, you partner and collaborate with the local law enforcement agencies to make
Absolutely.
sure that
We work very closely and collaborative with all of our local law enforcement and all the communities that we serve.
Great, thank you very much. My time's just about expired. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Mr. Carbajal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Maynard, over the last several years, more and more transit workers have been assaulted for simply doing their jobs. We have seen agencies put up their shields to protect drivers at the wheel, but that does not seem to be slowing the rate of assaults on these workers. These assaults, which have been widely publicized, are discouraging people from riding transit, discouraging workers from applying for jobs at transit agencies, and pushing more and more current transit workers into other safer jobs. The FDA recently proposed a general directive on preventing assaults on transit workers. I know this is a little redundant, as many of us are asking similar questions. Can you discuss what steps transit agencies are taking to prevent assaults on transit workers and beyond the FTA's minimums?
Thank you, and I hope I am a bit redundant here, but again, it is understanding what safety mitigation factors you can use on behalf of drivers, and certainly driver enclosures. We've seen a double-digit, over 70% decrease in assaults on drivers because of that enclosure. It is absolutely partnering with law enforcement, whether that transit system has its own law enforcement agency, they have a private security company, or they have an MOU with the local police jurisdictions. That partnership is key. Both the drivers and the passengers feel safer, and we've done surveys. We've asked them to feel safer when they see, whether it's a local police department or it's your security officer, when they see that presence there, they feel safer. I think it's understanding, again, what partnerships that you can work with in your local jurisdictions. And as I stated earlier, it's working with some of the social service agencies. Transit is a reflection. It's a microcosm, moving microcosm of what's happening in any urban city. And so if crime is up, we are the one, it's an open space. We love all, we serve all as public transit. And so we're going to see what's happening in an urban setting, it's going to happen on a bus. And so it is ensuring that we're spending resources. One of the things we're doing in the RTC, we have invested, we're the first, the 2 other agencies are following, with a company called Zero Eyes. We have the ability now through artificial intelligence and predictive analytics to identify a gun. If someone's carrying a gun, pulls out a gun in any of our transit terminals, that's under place so far. It's worked, and we've had a couple of instances that have proven effective. We are the first in the agency in the United States that the operators are carrying with them this mobile GPS device, that if something happens and they're off the bus, for example, a layover, they press it, it goes right to our BOC or into our security office, and we can respond immediately. And so I think it's doing the things you would think of, working with law enforcement, but it's also looking for technologies that can enhance the protection of both the customers and the workers. Our passengers in Las Vegas also have the ability on our mobile app to secret or anonymously report something that's happened on a bus. We have our local police department asked us to install live look-in on all of our vehicles. Other transit systems have that. So at any point in time, law enforcement and or our team can view what's happening in any bus at any time just by that technology. So it's going to take just some of that, the work that you expect, but also technology improvements.
Thank you. Mr. Reagan, following up on my question to Ms. Maynard, what more can Congress do to better protect these workers?
Well, first of all, I want to say that everything that Ms. Maynard has said has been really great in terms of what they're doing proactively to help protect their workers. Unfortunately, that's not been the case in many transit systems all across the country. That's why federal leadership was so necessary and why the provision that you all included in the bipartisan infrastructure law was so vital, because it does require transit agencies to develop these safety plans and to do so in a way that is collaborative with their workforce and with their unions. And I do think that as the federal government, now that we have a rule that is in place and a law that was passed a few years ago, attention to your local agencies to ensure, following up with them. What are you doing? How are you engaging? Where are we in the process of developing these plans? What results are you seeing? All of those things as a federal representative are things that you can do to try to hold your own transit agencies accountable. And I assure you, where we see failures, where we see people not doing what is necessary, when we see agencies not doing what is necessary, we will be sure to engage you all to let you know that there are problems with the law, with the fulfilling the intent of the law that you all passed.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, I'm out of time. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Mr. Moulton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Regan, unfortunately, the MBTA in Boston has had some troubles with safety over the past couple years, necessitating the federal government to get involved. We're not proud of this, but we want to fix it, and we want to make it better. Can you share some of the best practices that you've seen across the country that we might apply back home in Massachusetts?
Certainly, and and thank you for the question, but I know that enclosures and reimagining the workspace for workers is an important aspect of that, because at the end of the day, again, we are protecting people in their workspace, and that's an important aspect. So the physical space is important, but also I think these safety plans that are going to be developed that are required now, where workers have the opportunity to have their input, and they have to be adopted jointly with the union and with the agency. It can't just be recommendations can't just be imposed by the employer in this aspect, which is important. But I think for the most part, there is not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution to the safety problems. It's not going to be the same in Boston as it is in Las Vegas or as it is in Rochester, New York, where I'm from, because they're very different environments and different agencies. So I think the beauty of what the program that was put in place is it's going to take into account the local agencies, the reality of the local agencies, as well as what the workers, the eyes and ears on the ground in these systems are seeing day to day, and can help implement meaningful reforms that will protect both workers and passengers in those systems.
Thank you very much. Mr. Scribner, I appreciate some of your comments on high-speed rail and viability in certain corridors, if I understand your background correctly. Because I have long made the case that there are a lot of reasons to love high-speed rail, but one of them is that if you're a fiscal conservative, it's a good investment. It has a good return on investment. In fact, there's not some vast high-speed rail conspiracy that infects every other developed country in the world and just hasn't made it to America yet. It's just that a lot of other countries weigh the options. They actually have transportation policy that allows them to choose high-speed rail over highways with similar amounts of funding, which is not the case, of course, in the United States. The subsidies vastly favor airports and highways. And when they do that analysis, it often comes back that the cost-benefit ratios favor high-speed rail. In fact, I happen to co-author at Harvard Business School a study on California high-speed rail that reached two basic conclusions. This was 10 years ago. One, it's going to cost more than they're saying. We know that's true. But the second is that it still costs less than making the comparable investments in airports and expanding highways that you would have to make to meet 2050 demand. And that's so often left out of this debate. I wanted to ask you, what are your views on how we should subsidize transportation? And how should we be subsidizing transit? Should we be subsidizing highways, et cetera?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's pretty expansive. My general view is that we should be trying to reduce subsidies across all modes and to stop distorting the choices of people who ultimately choose one mode over the other, the time they choose to travel, and so on and so forth. So, you know,
See, and by the way, this is where I completely agree. Like, if we just had a level playing field and we actually allowed the sort of free market in transportation to determine the best solutions, there would be some corridors where we say it's too long for trains, you need to fly. Other corridors, it's just a better drive. But some corridors really make sense for transit or for high-speed rail, and we ought to do the economic analysis to determine that. We commissioned a study, my office did back in Massachusetts, to look at what are the subsidies for driving, because I don't think we think about that very much. We often think about the subsidies for transit agencies, and we hear these numbers about how much of each fare is covered by the taxpayer. We just asked, what are the subsidies for driving? It turned out that they determined in the state of Massachusetts, the state subsidizes driving to the tune of $64 billion every year. That's $14,000 per taxpayer, regardless of whether you own a car. And these subsidies come in the form of everything from just building and maintaining highways to providing state police, providing emergency services. 40,000 Americans died in car crashes. It's taxpayer dollars that clean all of those up. In contrast, by the way, not a single person has died in the entire history of high-speed rail in Japan. But as an aside, how do we think about reducing these subsidies, these gross over-subsidies for highways?
Well, when it comes to the interaction between subsidies for the road network and transit systems, for one, I think there is a synergy with congestion pricing. And not simply because of the revenue, but more for the incentive to not drive at those peak hours, and that may make transit more attractive. So I think there are ways to reduce the subsidies across modes and equalize across modes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I sure hope you can speak with the governor of New York. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Mr. Owens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, ranking member, and to your witnesses today. My home state of Utah has a remarkable story to share with other states and, more importantly, the federal government. They can follow the same type of success that has facilitated Utah's transit ecosystem to thrive. In fact, Utah's post-pandemic lessons are a stark contrast to the doom and gloom of some of the testimony today. Utah's Transit Authority does not run a budget deficit. Ridership is up 92% in pre-pandemic levels, expected to exceed pre-pandemic levels by next year. It has not dug itself into a hole with fiscally irresponsible reduced fares. There are no National Guardsmen in Utah's transit because of safety, because safety is not an issue. Our riders are and feel very, very safe. The state legislature continues to make historic investments into transit. This year alone, putting $400 million into our front-runner double tracking effort in anticipation for the 2034 Salt Lake City Olympics. This is not by accident. The governor, the legislator, the city, and local officials work arm in arm with their Metropolitan Planning Committee, an organization, to anticipate transportation needs for the state and decades into the future. The Utah's Unified Transportation Plan, which has mapped out our transportation needs all the way out to 2050, works because everyone had a hand in it, including our rural partners. They are not left behind. I've said this from coming onto this committee, that Utah does it right. We collaborate, we're innovative, we think outside the box. We want to make sure we're keeping an environment that keeps our kids in Utah instead of exporting them. And if I can say one thing for the benefit of not only Utahns, but this country, let us be the model. We know how to collaborate, how to run a budget, and how to think outside the box, and take advice from innovators. So I'm going to make that big ask. Let us be the model. Ms. Maynard, in your capacity with the Regional Transportation Commission of Southern Nevada, what do your interactions with the regional metropolitan planning organizations look like, and how have you collaborated with them for the benefit of users in your transportation authority?
Thank you, Congressman. As your neighbor in the state of Nevada, you have a fabulous CEO, Jay Fox, running UTA. You do a great, we admire you from afar, I should say. I'm sorry, I'm thinking about the front runner. If you could ask me that question again, my apologies.
What do your interactions with the regional metropolitan planning?
So it's interesting. We're one of the only organizations in the United States. We're also the Metropolitan Planning Organization. So literally, transit is on one floor, and you can walk down the hall, and MPO is on another floor. So the collaboration is key because we are, again, we're on the same team. We look at funding through our MPO for transit. We work collaboratively as the MPO. Of course, they're the regional planning organization for all of Southern Nevada. We are the public transit provider for all of Southern Nevada, so it works very, very well. I know that's not always the case in the United States, but I think generally speaking, the nexus there to have both the MPO and the transit system under the same roof has worked exceedingly well.
I just know we respect, a mutual respect for what the state of Nevada is doing. Next one is Nevada, like Utah, has experienced rapid growth in the last 20 years, and the RTC, like UTA, is fiscally stable. What does Nevada and Utah get right that other states are missing?
Gosh, again, I think a lot of it has to do with the investment that the community, the elected officials, whether at the local level or the state level, want to make in that system. I think that, I speak on behalf of the transit systems today, and I do think there is just some amazing transit CEOs that are doing the best that they can. I think we all take it very seriously how we spend tax dollars. We are a business. We may not generate a revenue, but we need to operate like a business. And I think when you look at it that way, again, it's looking at how you can more efficiently and effectively spend those tax dollars. And certainly understanding that we have been, Utah, Arizona, Nevada, one of the fastest growing regions. It's understanding the origin and destination and where people need to be, and again, how you allocate the resources that you have.
Thank you. And I'm just, as I close out, just say, I think we all need to look at this as a business, return on investment, and best value to our customers. So thank you so much. Appreciate that.
Gentleman yields, Mr. Garcia.
Thank you, Chairman, and thanks to all the witnesses for being here today. I think it's important to remember the historical context of how we got here and who this impacts. The decision to end the use of federal funding for transit operating expenses dates back to the Reagan administration. The deeply rooted government culture of deprioritizing transit is inherently tied to the deprioritizing of certain racial and socioeconomic communities as well. When we talk about the transit fiscal cliff, Latino, Black, and Brown communities are still the same groups of people that will be harmed the most by further cuts to transit. We also cannot forget the transit operators who are at the core of our transportation system. For almost 50 years, 13C transit labor protections have been a core component of our federal infrastructure investments, and they prevent federal money from undermining existing labor standards. It is critical that federal investments directly benefit working people and don't displace existing jobs. That's exactly what 13C does. Mr. Regan, can you explain how continuing to disinvest in transit and erode 13C protections would impact our most vulnerable communities and workers?
Sure, I think, and thank you for that question. When you look at the decision that was made during the pandemic, a wise decision to allow for the use of relief funds by transit agencies to be used for operating expenses, because Congress rightfully recognized that this is a vital service that needs the support to keep communities moving during this crisis that we were facing. As we're looking forward and we're looking at what the needs are of different transit agencies, having the flexibility to be able to use federal funds for operating assistance is critical. And as was mentioned by one of my fellow panelists earlier, when asked about the number of transit agencies that meet their costs entirely based on fare box revenue, the number was 0. So there are going to be needs. That could be, some of that may be on capital, other areas that may be on operating assistance, but the federal government needs to show the leadership to provide the opportunities for these agencies to use federal money as they see fit.
Thank you. I'd also like to highlight a topic that some see as a quick fix for these financial challenges, which is the use of autonomous vehicles for public transit. Again, Mr. Regan, do you feel that this is an effective substitute for transit operators
And what dangers do highly automated vehicles pose as the technology stands today?
Well, as it stands today, there are substantial risks. There's not a lot of proof that this can duplicate what is done by professional drivers in the world. I mean, as Waymo recently reminded us, they still seem to confuse trees from roads and sometimes make the wrong choice. This is a problem. So I think jumping to the, whatever the futuristic version of public transit is without the safety testing and the responsible policy making that would be required is frankly irresponsible. And I think, transit unions and workers have dealt with major leaps and changes in technology for over 100 years. This is not new to us to see more people implementing or bringing new technology into our industry, but we've had to find a way to adapt. And I think as we are looking at what new technology is coming forward, because we would be foolish just try to just say no, put it back in the bottle. We do need to have policies in place that are ensuring not only will it be implemented safely, that we are going to make sure that it is making workers be able to do their jobs better, but also look at the economic impacts and what impact it would have on communities if we are suddenly gutting jobs, major sources of good jobs in this country.
Thank you for that. I think it's clear that these technologies are not a replacement for transit operators to run safe and smooth operations, and that at the bare minimum, we need to ensure a safety network is in place as soon as possible. Thank you. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Mr. Molinaro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Glad to join you all. Thanks very much for full disclosure. I spent the last 12 years in county government, where in the state of New York I administered a public transit system. Mr. Regan, it's good to see you again. Can you reiterate specifically what kind of protections are afforded through 13C?
Yeah, and thank you for this, because it is, I think 13C is really at the core of what has created such labor stability over the last 60 years since it was implemented. It establishes the right, it protects the right to collectively bargain for the workers when there is federal investment being put into a region. It also makes sure that if in the event that there is a new provider, that wages and benefits can't be unilaterally slashed. Where there are differences, they are negotiated locally between the union and the provider and signed off on by the Department of Labor, usually very quickly. And finally, when there are changes that need to be made due to this investment, federal investment in the transit operations, it ensures that workers have the opportunity to be trained and that there are the resources to train them into other jobs, oftentimes upskilled with higher wages and benefits. So it's creating more opportunity in communities throughout the country. So if you're in a community that receives federal funds and you have, 13C is going to be attached to it, you're making sure that this is not just an investment in stuff. It's not just an investment in a vehicle. It's an investment in the community and in the people in that community.
We tend to forget, I'm going to, not to interrupt you, but to reclaim my time, I guess, we tend to forget that the very people that are protected by collective bargaining agreements and the relationship between employer and employee through those agreements are, in fact, the people paying taxes as well and engaged in our community. And certainly during COVID, we know that transit workers were on the extreme front line, tragic deaths, and a lot of violence. Mr. Scribner, you offered and authored an op-ed that takes a uniquely different focus and approach as it relates to 13C. You call ultimately for the repeal of transit worker protections in order for agencies to more cheaply outsource and automate jobs. Does the federal law actually prohibit agencies from using technology to achieve greater efficiency?
No, but it's been it's been cited as a barrier for 50 years.
It's been cited as a barrier by whom?
Office of Technology Assessment, Study on Automation, Automating Rail Transit, 1976.
I often wonder how many collective bargaining agreements those individuals have engaged in. I happen to think that, in fact, the biggest challenge is employers, municipal employers, and especially don't know how to negotiate good contracts with good employees. But to be clear, there is no prohibition, right? Local providers can achieve technological advancements under federal law, and 13C doesn't preclude that from happening, correct?
There's not an outright prohibition.
Right. So I just offer to to a degree that it's both lack of will and capacity that keeps many of these transit providers, I was one of them, from achieving the kind of efficiencies in partnership with their employees. And that I fear certainly that the elimination of 13C as protection means the elimination of jobs. So you obviously advocate for more autonomous vehicles. We certainly know this as a technology to transition to makes sense. And of course, other countries are employing it. Paris now has unattended train lines, and in that transition, not a single worker lost their job. Is there anything in U.S. law that would prevent a transit agency from doing exactly the same thing? Could they not make the transition and protect jobs at the same time?
No, but they could not realize labor cost savings, which provides a pretty strong disincentive to invest in pretty expensive new capital.
So when you say that, that is an assumption that I don't think plays out when you have capable municipal or transit authority employer negotiating a collective bargaining agreement with capable, qualified employees. And I do think that this rush to undermine the collective bargaining agreements and the protections afforded public or municipal employees is always the excuse we use in order to achieve savings. I think that's the kind of thing that gets addressed by people who don't actually negotiate the contracts or don't want to take the political risk of negotiating healthy contracts. And I do think after COVID, and certainly what we've seen, and I pardon me for isolating and focusing on your commentary, but I find it offensive because ultimately there are individuals who are going to work every day trying to do their jobs well, and they want the protection of their federal government, they want the protection of their local governments, and often what we need is the 13C protections, but the federal transit authorities to ensure that they're supporting the capacity of local communities to make the most efficient and effective transit decisions possible while protecting the people who are moving our people. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you. The chairman now recognizes himself for 5 minutes. As someone that's made my living for 30 plus years in the trucking industry and being in the, my wife and I have owned a trucking company now for 30 plus years, I can tell you firsthand that our highway system is in need of a lot of improvement. My concern is that money will be diverted from the Highway Trust Fund in order to pay for transit programs. And so what are transit agencies doing to improve the stability of their finances so that they are not dependent on the federal government to bail them out? And I would just like to go down the line for anybody that wants to tackle that question.
Thank you for that question. I will, again, at the RTC, we are not only the public transit provider, we are the roadway funding agency. And we understand that, that it's an approach that takes for whether you are funding your highways or you're funding public transit, how you move people, goods, and services matter. It's an economic, if you have a transportation problem, you have an economic problem in all those modes. And so I think again, if you've got state or local efforts looking at how you fund, how various regions fund their roadways are different. In Southern Nevada, we had a ballot question in 2016 that passed overwhelmingly where we're indexing fuel tax to inflation. It allows us now, we have a lot more local money that isn't necessary, that's a great match for any federal opportunities to, again, improve our roadway systems. And it would be the same for public transit. Again, they both matter, right? They both are a public good, and how roadways are funded, how the aviation system's funded, how transit's funded, it all matters in how we move, again, our goods and services.
No, I understand that, but I don't think I've ever been subsidized with anything. Normally, we are the one that pays, and so that's where I'm leading to. What are the transit agencies out there doing to improve their own finances so that that they're not dependent on the federal government to bail them out all the time?
Again, thank you for that question. It's an industry that does not generate a profit, and I think again it takes local funding, state funding, and federal funding. And again, it is a public good. When you invest in transit, you're investing in your community. I think there, certainly at the local level, many transit systems around the United States engage with their local elected officials to pass ballot initiatives and various funding mechanisms. Each transit system is funded differently to a certain degree. You've seen one transit system, you've seen one. So some transit systems, it's sales tax, property tax, DMV fees, Uber, Lyft. So I think it just depends on that local government.
Okay, thank you. All right. I didn't know if anybody else wanted to tackle that one. That's all I had. I wanted to come by and ask that. Which one? With that, I yield back. Are there any further questions from any members of the subcommittee who have not been recognized? Seeing none, that concludes our hearing for today. I would like to thank each of the witnesses for your testimony. The subcommittee now stands adjourned.